When times are tough
The world is about to end?
and the world looks bleak,
It was impossible.
there is only one man who can save us from ourselves.
The one thing you know when you're born is that you will die.
This is Howard Bloom Saves the Universe,
I believe they believe it, even though I find it very hard to believe that they believe it.
with noted author, speaker, and philosopher Howard Bloom.
Attention is the oxygen of the human soul.
And now, here's Howard and our MC, Chad Dugatz.
Hello and welcome to Howard Bloom Saves the Universe with Mr. Howard Bloom. I am Chad Dugatz. Hello, Howard.
And I can swear to you that he is genuinely the real Chad Dugatz.
And you are the real Mr. Bloom. This is your show. We are here to help us save the universe. And over the last week and a half since we've last spoke behind microphones, by the way, it's Friday, August 11th, 5:18 as we start this recording process for context. Over the last week, it seems as though our universe might need saving.
Yes, we've spun up a little dust in the cosmic plumes. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-un being the head of North Korea, have gone into an insult match, a shouting match, a threat match. North Korea has been making really astonishing threats against the United States for a long time. Claiming that it will wipe us off the map, turn us into a sea of fire, burn all of us to a crisp, and all kinds of other things of that sort. And this, in the last week, news reports 2 weeks ago, about Kim Jong-un's 2 ballistic missile launches, said that the ballistic missiles could at best reach Alaska. Then, over the course of several days, that report changed, and it was then said that these ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, could actually reach cities like Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, in the middle of the United States. Then came the report that we didn't have to worry about this because North Korea hadn't perfected the art of making nuclear warheads so small that they could actually fit on a missile. Then, a few days later, came another report. And the other report was that, indeed, North Korea has the technology to shrink a nuclear weapon down to a small enough size to fit in the nose cone of an intercontinental ballistic missile.
When we say small enough size, because to the layman, I don't know what that means. Small enough size to me, is that my size of my cell phone, or is it small enough size, the size of a Hyundai?
Well, the original atomic bombs
Yes.
back in the 1940s, Big Boy and Little Boy, one of them was the size of the entire room in which we're sitting.
So this room, I know for a fact, is 10 by 7.
Right, and it weighed far more than a ton. It
Gotcha.
weighed an awful lot. So it was. It took 20 or 30 years to actually, or possibly less, but it took time, at least a decade, to be able to shrink that down small enough that you could put it on the tip of a rocket.
Now, when there's only been 2 nuclear weapons used in the history of mankind against an enemy. Obviously, there were tests of nuclear weapons, but as you said, they were both the ones used in Japan, Big Boy and Little Boy. They were dropped. They were not shot at people, so we didn't even necessarily have the rocket capabilities and the missile capabilities to necessarily launch those rockets. They were literally just munitions dropped on
Right.
on
It
people.
wasn't until the late 1950s or the early 1960s that we managed to miniaturize them sufficiently to put them on the tips of rockets, and then we got our rockets beefy enough to be able to be intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Right.
The trick is that if you read a book called The Muhammad Code, How a Desert Prophet Brought You ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram.
Who wrote that book?
Howard Bloom,
Okay,
I
there you go.
understand.
Yes.
Okay. So if you read that book, the final chapter is about Iran and its development of nukes and how it conned us into having a war in Iraq so that we could hand Iraq to Iran on a platter. And it tells of Dr. A.Q. Khan in Pakistan, who was funded by the Iranians in large part to develop nuclear weapons and import all kinds of forbidden technologies from all over the advanced world in order to manufacture those nuclear weapons, and about how Dr. A.Q. Khan was selling a nuclear starter kit. And the nuclear starter kit, and this is back in the 1990s, A.Q. Khan's nuclear starter kit included a Chinese plan for a miniaturized nuclear bomb that could be fit on the cone or in the cone of an ICBM, of a rocket. And it explains in the Muhammad Code that A.Q. Khan sold this to Iran and North Korea. Now, Iran and North Korea are very close allies. They share technologies. All of the Iranian rocket technology is built on North Korean rocket technology.
So they're lockstep together.
They're lockstep together. And if two things. First of all, if North Korea has nuclear weapons, there's a very good chance that either Iran has them or could get them with very little notice. Secondly, these weapons are based on a Chinese plan that is for a miniaturized nuclear weapon that is designed specifically to fit in a nose cone. So anybody who's followed this should have known from the very beginning that these were not that North Korea may have had initial bombs the size of this room, the size of Big Boy and Little Boy, but that it had the plans for going right straight to miniaturized nuclear weapons from the beginning. So this has provoked a war of words between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Yes. Now, when we hear war of words between Donald Trump and the leader of North Korea, we, and by we I mean 95% of the world, are able to get Donald Trump's words. We're actually able to hear them. When we talk about the war of words we're hearing from North Korea, are we hearing them from him directly? His people? Where are we hearing that from? Because that's a question I have not been answered yet for me.
Okay, we are not hearing them directly. They are coming out of North Korea's various news agencies, all of which are rigidly government controlled.
Yeah, I mean, it's government PR.
Yeah, exactly. So it is as close to Kim Jong-un's words as Kim Jong-un wants it to be.
Gotcha.
And then those are being picked up by the AP, Reuters, the Agence France-Presse, et cetera, and broadcast to us. So it takes a bit of digging to get the original words. However, the words of today's official pronouncements.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything in the news today. So this
today, the big image was that the West is a lump, and that North Korea will pound that lump into a jelly.
Now, who is he saying that for? Because based on all the knowledge I have of North Korea, while they might be able to mobilize and deploy some nuclear weapons, it might not be a large cache of weapons.
Yeah.
So, yet, correct. So who is he saying that to? Who is he trying to scare? Because not necessarily... Look, the thought of a nuclear weapon anywhere is horrific. Can we agree on that?
I would go even beyond that. What you don't realize, I mean, Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, has said an old cliche, which is that once a war starts, you have no idea of where it's going to end up. And wars often end up in the destruction of cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Los Angeles, etc. Totally unexpected, and yet it happens. So we're looking at a catastrophe of a kind that the United States, despite the fact that in the War of 1812 the English burned Washington, we're looking at a catastrophe of a kind that the United States has never, ever, ever experienced and seldom imagines.
All right. So there's a lot of stuff here. So he's and his people are saying we can wipe you off the earth. Do his people believe it?
His people believe anything he wants them to believe. If you are an average North Korean citizen and you don't show the precise smile that you are supposed to register at a certain point in a public event, or the precise frown that you are supposed to register in a public event, you can be hauled off and sent to a gulag or shot. There's very rigid thought control, emotional control, and content control in North Korea.
This is a conversation I want to maybe have for another show, but I mean, the level of brainwashing that you and I will call brainwashing,
right?
That to us looks like brainwashing, but is a way of life in North Korea. I would like to talk another time about how that happens.
Every culture has its own brand of brainwashing.
Correct.
It's called education within that culture. And cultures are very distinct and very unique. For example, when Steve Bannon was in the Navy for 8 years, and that is Donald Trump's closest advisor, his strategic advisor. And when Steve Bannon's ship set into ports in the Arab Middle East, he said it was like landing on another planet. The people were so different, the cities were so different, the way of thought was so different. And he's more right than the multiculturalists who say that if you sat anybody from any culture down for a cup of coffee, you'd discover he has the same interests as you and me. No, that is not true.
Clearly.
So each culture has its own form of brainwashing. But there's another problem here, and it's one that the press has been ignoring, despite the fact that it's been covering this North Korean situation and Donald Trump's steps or statements against it minute by minute, and that is that wars produce chain reactions. Wars produce domino effects.
Good and bad.
Right. Well, I wouldn't say good. I can't see any good ones.
Well, it got us out of the Great Depression, World War II.
Yes, it did, but at a tremendous cost.
Tremendous cost, yes. But
the deal is, in the First World War, you had two networks of alliances. On the one side, there was the French, the Russians, and the English. On the other side, there was the Germans and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And all of them were committed so that if there was any move made against any side, all the allies on that side would jump in by treaty obligation. So an archduke from the Habsburg Empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, that almost nobody had ever heard of, the Archduke Ferdinand, was shot by a Serbian nationalist. Nobody knew what a Serbian nationalist was in those days. What the hell was Serbia and where in the world was it? Because if Germany went to war, then the Austro-Hungarian Empire went to war, and if there were an attack on the French, then the French went to war, the Russians went to war, and the English went to war. That insignificant little bit of nothing in history turned into the second major industrial war of all times. And between 20 million and 70 million people were killed in that war. Entire towns were wiped out in that war. Towns like yours and mine. So what we have to be aware of is NATO is an alliance on one side of the divide. And NATO, believe it or not, has 27 countries, all committed to each other's defense in case there is an attack on any one of them.
What partners would we be surprised that's in NATO?
I'm not sure, but I suspect that Poland is in there somewhere. There are a bunch of Eastern European countries that we managed to pick up and bring over to our side after the Soviet Union fell.
Asking the question, I get an answer because I look it up myself. I sit with the computer in front of me just for behind the scenes.
Yes, right, and he does a brilliant job of concentrating on me and concentrating on the computer simultaneously.
Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg. By the way, I'm glad the Luxembourg people stand with us. The Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United Kingdom and the United States. Those are the original 29 members, or however many there was. Germany joined. Spain is a part of it. Now Hungary, Czech Republic, and some of the Adriatic states like Croatia and Albania and Montenegro. Was the last group to join in.
So an attack on any one of those is to be considered an attack on all 27 of us. Then there is an alliance with that doesn't even have a name on the other side. And that alliance consists of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea and Syria.
Is Venezuela, I have to ask, in that alliance?
Venezuela is a sympathizer,
gotcha.
And they're a sympathizer with Venezuela. The Cuba of the Castros is a sympathizer. These are loosely tied in. So our media has been speaking as if we could do a preemptive attack on North Korea, and that would be it. It wouldn't spread. No, that's not true. China made a statement today that if North Korea makes its own first attack on the United States or on anybody else with nuclear weapons, that they will not support North Korea. But if we preemptively attack North Korea, they will step in. In other words, what we're looking at is a domino effect like the one that led to World War I, but this time it's leading to World War III and to the annihilation of most of the human race.
So one of the things that's come up a lot over this week, and I also want to put a little pin on the idea. I want to talk about the depression and like fear. Like people are living in fear and a little depression. But let's talk briefly about more calls on China to do something. You're hearing a lot of American politicians saying, China needs to step up and do stuff. What can China do to step up and alleviate some of this pressure?
Well, first of all, you have to know the Chinese mood. And the Chinese mood is nationalistic, and it regards the United States as an imperialist enemy.
But yet
people
we're in
the
business
streets
together.
But people in the streets are angry at the United States, and because of the rigid way in which China controls its internet, there have been lots of people who have tried to post things saying it's time for a war with the United States. And fortunately, the Chinese government has kept those statements off of the internet.
Okay.
So the mood is one of, okay, you guys came in and carved China up like a melon back in the 1800s, and we had been the mightiest nation on earth, and all nations came to us and bowed to us, and then you guys just took us over, and we had, and you forced us to allow opium into our country so you could pay off the debts that you were incurring by importing our stuff, which was the world's leading stuff at the time. So you shoved opium down our throats. We had a century of humiliation, the Chinese feel, at your hands, the hands of the West. And now it's time for China to go back to its natural role in the world, its natural position, the center of all things around which everybody else revolves. And the United States supported the Philippines roughly 2 years ago. There's the South China Sea. And the South China Sea has got all these coral atolls. And the Chinese have been building those atolls into islands, and 4 of them, I believe, they've equipped as airfields, as military outposts for their Air Force.
Thank you.
And this is despite the fact that there are roughly 7 nations that claim rights to the South China Sea: Vietnam, Thailand, everybody there, the Philippines. So the Philippines, with American encouragement, took the Chinese to the World Court over one of these islands. And the World Court agreed with the Philippines and chastised the Chinese. The Chinese regard that as totally illegitimate and just another step in the imperialist war of humiliation against the Chinese. And it is time the Chinese feel for that age of humiliation to end. Xi Jinping, the head of China, calls for the realization of the Chinese dream. Well, the Chinese dream is that once again China will be the center of the world around which all things revolve. Now, is China too is imperialistic. It has a different way of doing imperialism. For the West, England, the United States, Germany, France, imperialism has always been a matter of building navies and sending troops to distant shores. China has had another form of imperialist expansion. Spread out on your margins, spread out on your borders. Just keep growing like an amoeba by eating the lands on your borders. So right now, China is in a standoff with India over territory that's between India and China. You know that in roughly 1948, the Chinese took Tibet. They want Taiwan. They have the One China policy, which means Taiwan is a rebel province and actually belongs to them. They are taking over the South China Sea right now. And this World Court judgment that the Philippines got brings the age of humiliation, the era of humiliation, right smack dab into the middle of the Chinese consciousness. And the Chinese are furious about it, and the Chinese people in the streets, some of them, want a war. And this is an excuse for a war.
Well, we have people here that want a war.
Yes.
Clearly, we have people in America that want a war.
And they're stupid because they don't understand that in a war, you lose everything that you valued. You lose your home. You lose the city that you live in and love. lose the city you grew up in. If it's another city, you lose everything. People are reduced to. I had a friend from France who lived. She was a child living through the Second World War. There was no food. Her house survived, but she had to go out into the garden and find snails and eat the garden snails. She had to eat the vegetation in the garden. And she was lucky because her home survived intact, and the homes of many people did not survive intact. America firebombed something like seven Japanese cities before we dropped the atomic bomb. Firebombed them. People starved to death. You'll find Japanese anime about kids who are starving to death on the outskirts of these attacks. We killed 700,000 innocent civilians just to bring Japan to its knees. This is without the use of atomic weapons. This is what happens in war. And we are lined up for a world war, and we have to avoid it. And at the same time, we have to denuclearize North Korea. Either that or we have to become accustomed. Look, once upon a time, I think we might have mentioned this in a previous broadcast, there was a leader in China. His name was Mao Zedong. And he went to a conference in Moscow, which was his patron initially, and he told this conference that we in China could afford to lose 300,000 people in a war with the United States or a war with the West, but ultimately we would win. Ultimately, communism would win. In other words, he was willing to take huge losses in order to win.
To win.
And the North Koreans, hey, they've lived off of the herbage, the greenery on their hills before. They could do it again. We don't know what they're prepared to sacrifice. And we have to recognize that these are sacrifices that occur in war. So how we're going to get rid of this nuclearization, I'm not quite sure. The Trump administration did something very positive last weekend for which it was not credited in the media, or it's only been credited incidentally. It pulled together 15 countries in the Security Council of the United Nations to sign on to ratcheting up sanctions against North Korea. Now, what's the significance of that? Are those sanctions going to work?
Because don't we already have sanctions in place?
Yes, and the sanctions have never worked.
Right.
They have never worked. But the significance of this means that we are in diplomatic consultation with Russia, with a country with whom we have substantial problems right now, and with China, another country with whom we have substantial problems right now. But one way or the other, if Donald Trump were left to his own devices and there were no Rex Tillerson and there were no Mad Dog Mattis, Donald Trump would be doing this like a cowboy all on his own. But no, the people around him are wise enough to use diplomacy to bring a network of allies into play around us, because it's only if the Russians and the Chinese will not respond to a preemptive attack that we can try to use a preemptive attack. If they don't go along with it and they're likely to be pulled in on North Korea's side, it's all over for what we call the United States of America.
Okay, so that's scary. Walk that back, or I'm going to give you a space to walk that back. What is all over for the United States of America?
Washington, New York, food,
Do you think China
going
would,
to cities.
You think China would bomb us?
If things got hairy enough, yes. We didn't go into World War II planning to wipe out 70 Japanese cities. We kept fighting and fighting and fighting and wanted to put an end to this war, wanted the Japanese to surrender. The Japanese had no more intention of surrendering than we did. And ultimately, we were driven to this desperate move of killing men, women, and children and wiping out the entire cities in which they lived, wiping out the whole infrastructure so they couldn't even get food. They couldn't get any of the necessities of daily life, those few who survived, because many did not survive.
Right.
So we may go into a war intending none of these things, but wars are the mother of unintended consequence.
So I'm going to give you another chance. Should we do a preemptive strike on North Korea, which seems, of everything, somewhat likely?
If we get the approval, if we can get the cooperation of Russia and China, perhaps. However, Kim Jong-un has built his weapons factories deep, deep, deep inside of mountains. Now, we have bunker buster bombs that are specifically to reach deep, deep inside of mountains. We don't know where all of his weapons facilities are. And he's been smart enough to build his rockets on trucks so that they're not in a permanent location at all. They can shuttle around the country. So it would be very hard to use a preemptive strike to get rid of his weapons capacities.
All right. So, all right. I'm still trying to understand how it got this bad so fast, or has it always been this bad?
It got so bad so fast because Kim Jong-un has been relentless and has kept up a very high pace on developing both his rockets and developing his nukes. He understands something that we should understand.
Okay.
We made deals with two countries that if they got rid of their nuclear weapons, we would protect them till the end of time. Those two countries were the Ukraine, which was the heartland of the advanced weapons production capabilities of the Soviet Union.
The former Soviet Empire.
Right, and which built the nuclear weapons of the Soviet Union. And the other country we made a deal with was Libya. Well, what happened to Muammar Gaddafi? He was taken prisoner and shot by his own people.
And worse.
Yeah. So our deal was worth nothing.
Right.
What happened with the Ukraine? Russia has invaded the Ukraine with its little green men and taken over Crimea, which is a part of the Ukraine, and is showing no respect for Ukrainian sovereignty, despite the fact that Russia was a signatory to this deal that if the Ukraine got rid of its nuclear weapons, we would protect its territorial sovereignty. So Kim Jong-un knows that if you give up your nuclear weapons, you could be dead.
Right.
Very quickly. And you can't. You absolutely must hold on to those nuclear weapons. Again, hopefully, the positive view is that, like Mao Zedong, who never used his nuclear weapons against us, he developed his in the 1960s, and who said horrible things about destroying people by the millions, and it would be fine with him. We learned to live with Chinese nukes. Could we learn to live with North Korean nukes? Would Kim Jong-un stop making his threats? We don't know. And then there's another problem, the red line.
No more problems.
Well, yes, there is another problem.
Fine.
It's the red line. Donald Trump was one of the many who saw the big mistake that Barack Obama made when he drew a red line. He said, in Syria, if you use chemical weapons, you crossed a red line, and the revenge will be swift and terrible. And then when Syria crossed the red line, he did nothing, thus damaging hugely America's credibility.
Yes.
Well, Donald Trump has just done that. He's done it already. He said several days ago, if North Korea makes any threats, then we'll turn them into a sea of fire. And North Korea's made threats since then. Have they been turned into a sea of fire yet? So what does that do to America's credibility?
Again, it shows us as the weak parent.
Yeah, exactly. It shows American weakness. So right now, the North Korean propaganda is saying not only that Donald Trump is irrational, but that he's senile.
Right. Okay, so they're laughing at our president. Here in the country, we're laughing at Donald Trump, at least me and you and people on our side, because he looks like a little frustrated man by all of this, and that he does not have the power he originally thought he had. As you said, left to his own devices, he probably would go out and just bomb them. The fact that he gets to think about who lives and dies and actually has a say in that is very upsetting to many, many Americans here. So let's give a little hope to us. I mean, can he just say, okay, launch an attack on them, and the generals have to launch an attack?
Pretty much, yes. He's the commander-in-chief. They can argue back. They can argue that that's unwise. But ultimately, he's the commander-in-chief and can launch an attack without knowing any of these subtleties that we've just talked about.
Well, I mean, I get the feeling he doesn't know a lot of anything.
He doesn't know history, and he knows television, and he knows ratings.
Because I know this week he was speculating that if Mitch McConnell can't get anything done as leader of the Senate, that Mitch McConnell should be stepping down.
Well, let's go into that for a second.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Donald Trump has blamed the stall on repealing Obamacare and replacing it on Mitch McConnell. But Donald Trump, when he was campaigning for president, said that he would give us a medical plan that we would find a dream come true. We would just love it and adore it. In other words, he either implied or stated overtly that he had a plan. Well, it turned out that, like everything else Donald Trump says, he had no plan whatsoever. So who's to blame for having no plan? Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump or both?
Well, that's what I mean, but why doesn't the base see that, okay, perhaps you might defend Donald Trump, but see he's partly culpable for this inaction to remove a piece of legislation that some people don't love?
Because they're sticking with their team, with their side of things, and every day they are reminded of the enemy. Right now, they're reminded of Hillary. Remember criminal Hillary? Well, right now there's a judge, and it's a judge appointed by Obama, who has said that, yes, the State Department must open its files of correspondence to see if there's anything related to Benghazi. And this has given Fox TV and the other, the mainstream media of the right, it's given it tons of fodder to point to Hillary Clinton and to point to her as the villain. By the way, well, we'll go into that in a second.
Yes.
To point to her as the villain. And as long as they can point to the villains of people like you, me, and Hillary Clinton, then everybody wants to stick together on their side. They don't want to be critical of the leader of their team. The fact that Donald Trump is in the White House at all means their team has won, and they are not going to give up on that win.
Although I think now more and more the Republican team is realizing that Donald Trump is not a Republican at all.
Maybe, but
it's still their man.
But our side took great comfort in the fact that Flake, Senator Flake, what is his first name? I forget. At any rate,
yes.
Richard Flake or something like that he just wrote a book critical of Donald Trump. Well, the fact is that Flake never supported Donald Trump at all. He was against Donald Trump when Donald Trump was a candidate. He's still against Donald Trump. So his book doesn't represent a movement against Donald Trump in the Republican Party. Yes, there have been signs of discontent with Donald Trump. I'm sure that Mitch McConnell is no longer a Donald Trump fan because Donald Trump has been piling it on against Mitch McConnell over the last week. But look what piling it on against Jeff Sessions did to Jeff Sessions. It's made him an even more rabid attack dog on behalf of Donald Trump. So who knows? The most important thing is that we're standing on the lip of World War III, and we've talked about the fact that Donald Trump, on a rational level, doesn't get it. He's ill-informed. He doesn't have the historical information it takes to make well-informed decisions, but that Donald Trump is a gamesman of the gut. And he won the election by being a gamesman of the gut. Even though he lost it, he won it.
Right.
He's in the White House, not Hillary.
So you're saying, all right, there's a lot there. And yes, he's in the White House. How old are you? You're in your 70s.
I'm 74.
We did know that.
Yeah.
So you lived through the first true Cold War.
Yep.
I guess you were in middle and elementary and high school in the 60s. Is that about right?
It was the 1940s and 1950s, and we had duck and cover drills.
So you did have the duck and cover drill.
Oh, yes.
So I imagine, as somebody who grew up with duck and cover, that's a pretty scary thing. I just remember having fire drills and be like, oh, we got to make sure we leave correctly. A duck and cover drill is pretty freaking scary.
Right.
And in hindsight, we realized it would have done absolutely nothing.
Right.
Except,
well, putting your hands, getting down and crouching and putting your nose to the floor and putting your hands over the back of your head, how much is that going to protect you against a nuclear fireball?
It's not. But it will at least prevent you from getting a concussion when your head hits the floor. One less thing to get you. I know of many people right now who feel that stress of duck and cover that we're just describing but yet I don't feel any of that stress. So why am I not feeling it, and why are others freaking out?
We were raised with the specter of a nuclear war that will wipe out the human species.
I remember the Cold War days. I remember the 80s.
Right.
And, yes, of course.
And it was scary. So that's probably singed itself into our souls. Imprinting points, there are passion points, that certain things that happen to you at certain key moments in your childhood just shape the way your brain develops through the rest of your life. And our brains were shaped around nuclear annihilation. So your generation, you feel, doesn't feel the imminent threat of nuclear annihilation?
Yeah. Well, I think I have contemporaries who are afraid of it.
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening. And
Right.
I mean, I hope I'm right, but am I just really naive?
You're naive. Because wars do
You're
not
naive. No, I'm just.
Well,
Yeah, I'm
wars
kidding.
do not come often.
They don't.
They come roughly once every generation. But when they come, they are monstrous.
Got it.
I mean, even the small wars that have been going on nonstop in places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You and I could not live a normal life in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We would be at risk of having our home burned with us in it,
Right.
or being killed by various really brutal means at any moment. And we're not accustomed to that. We're accustomed to the normal of peace. But we have to recognize that periodically the abnormal of war breaks out. You have to do everything in your power to stop it before it starts, because once it starts, it's out of anybody's control. Nobody wanted to bog down in trenches for 4 years in World War I. Nobody wanted battles where as many as 200,000 people were killed in 3 days. 200,000 people in 3 days, and we're complaining about war casualties of 17.
Right.
So war can get a lot worse than anything that we imagine, and all you have to do to see how worse it can get is look at the three great industrial wars. The Civil War, which killed 700,000 people and was the world's first industrial war where railroads and telegraphs were used. World War I, where, as I said, 40 to 70 million people were killed. World War II, where 40 to 70 million people were killed. That's a lot of people. That includes you. It would have included you and me in all probability.
Of course, Jews. We would have been living in Eastern Europe. Of course, that doesn't include us. Would an assassination of Kim Jong-un do anything? Because I've heard a school of thought that says, can't we just go in there and take him out?
If we took him out, imagine somebody assassinating Donald Trump. Now, first of all...
hang on a second. Hang on.
Okay, bear with me.
Hang on. I got to get the smile off my face.
Yes, right. But the trick is this. When there's a war, people cluster around their leader, even if they thought the leader was the most ridiculous buffoon in the world. All of a sudden, they just clump around him. There were a whole bunch of Russian intellectuals who had fled Russia, and they were mostly socialists, and they were living Karl Marx. Well, he wasn't from Russia, but he spent his time at the British Museum. They were at places like the British Library. They were all over Europe, and they were the opposition. They were constantly critiquing the Tsar. Their whole lives were devoted to critiquing the Tsar until World War I was declared. Then all of them suddenly went back to Russia and became patriots in favor of the Tsar because they needed to help Russia defend its existence in that war. And that's what happens to us humans. We clump together around our leaders in war, and leaders take advantage of that.
Well, if you remember September 12th, 2001, the love of George W. Bush was rocketed to almost unsafe adulation because he was almost given a green light to do whatever he wanted, thus started the Iraq War. It's
a good point. So we would find ourselves rallying around Donald Trump if we felt an existential threat, a threat to our very existence.
And one of the things you also mentioned is kind of rallying around our politicians. Here's something I kind of don't understand. There are some really horrible movies out there who get like a general approval rating of about 20%, and those movies die away and we never hear from them again. Right now, Congress has a 20% approval rating. That means that only 1 in 5 people enjoy or are supportive of Congress as a whole. Yet congressmen and women continually get reelected to the positions and continually come up impotent, for lack of a better word. Why is that?
Well, the polls show that people disapprove of Congress. Congress's rating, positivity rating, has been as low as 11%. And yet they approve of their own senator or congressman. So the discontent with the Senate doesn't extend to the discontent with the one representative you can control with your vote.
Yeah, I'm sorry. As of the latest tally by Real Clear Politics, the approval is 15.7%.
Well, that's high
Yeah.
compared to where Congress has been.
But I'm just surprised that there's just not so much more ire and anger at Congress from the people.
Well, we have ire. I mean, certain politicians are masters at harvesting ire, anger. And the one who's most masterful at harvesting that anger in our current generation is Donald Trump. He and Steve Bannon are absolute masters. Steve Bannon, who's is the strategist behind Donald Trump. He doesn't control Donald Trump like a puppet, but he and Donald Trump are very, very close. He spent a part of his career as, I believe it was an investor in a company that made its money by selling cyber weapons to kids who play video games, swords, armor, stuff like that. Non-existent swords and armor that only exist in the virtual world of the video game. And so he spent a part of his career in one of the most irrationally led groups of humans on planet Earth, intelligent people who, in the grip of a game, suddenly became somebody else.
Yes.
Somebody totally other, who in the grip of a game, which means killing, which means going out against enemies, at least in a fantasy world. He came to know the feelings of those fantasy world participants. And those are the feelings that exist in you and me, exist in every single one of us. And a successful politician, a successful demagogue, taps those primal emotions, the same way a video game was tapping a primal emotion. And in the game right now between Donald Trump and North Korea, it's a visceral game. It's an instinctual game. It is a game of the darker part of ourselves that only show up in things like video games and war. And Donald Trump has shown a tendency to be able to play those games in ways that we all think are ridiculous, but that win.
So when he says, as he did this week, under my presidency, I have modernized our nuclear arsenal.
That's ridiculous.
And at the same time, he wants to de-nuke the world.
That is the Donald Trump
Who's he saying that to? Is he saying that to the American people, or is he saying that to an international audience?
Both. Fortunately, the international audience knows how stupid it is.
Right.
Donald Trump told us when, in an earlier period of threats with North Korea, that he was sending an armada of enormous size, overwhelming power to North Korea. And he was talking about an aircraft carrier and its accompanying ships that, in fact, was on its way, that was 4,000 miles away or something like that, and was sailing in the opposite direction. Donald Trump's an ignorant buffoon. And when he says he has ordered the modernization of our nuclear forces, CNN and all of the mainstream media of the left point out that this modernization was actually put together under Barack Obama, and it's a 10-year plan, and it's nowhere near fruition. But Donald Trump has just shown the world, he's just shown Angela Merkel and the other world leaders that he's stupid.
Right.
That he doesn't have a clue.
And I think they all knew it anyway. We knew that.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know which audience he's playing to when. Because I do understand the need to kind of bolster and, peacock and strut and warn. I kind of do get that. And I do understand that the leader of North Korea is volatile in that we don't know what's going to happen there, and that's very dangerous when we don't know what they have, what they're thinking they have, and when they might use it. So a lot of times I almost feel like he's trying to speak to the people of North Korea. Is his message even getting through?
No, of course it's not getting through. The Korean media is rigidly controlled. People who do things like have radios that are tuned into the radio frequencies of South Korea or China, those people are either put in a gulag where they're overworked to death or they're killed outright. Thought crime, the famous phrase from...
Sure, of course.
Okay. Thought crime is real in North Korea. And paying attention in any way to any source of information other than the government source of information is punishable by lifelong imprisonment or death. So any message that Donald Trump thinks he's giving to the Korean people, he's wrong.
So then I'm going to ask a question which I feel like I ask every week on the show. does he believe his own bullshit?
Of course he believes it.
So that's scary.
Yes,
That
it
is
is.
very scary because that's like saying, I know I can fly. I believe I can fly, where you're trying to inspire other people. You can do whatever you want. But saying, I know I can fly, I believe I can fly, and then jumping off your barn and dying, that's troublesome. And if he believes the rhetoric, we're all screwed.
Yes, and he believes the rhetoric. There's a bunch of speculation in evolutionary biology about lying. David Livingston Smith has written an entire book about it. And you lie the most effectively when you totally believe that the lie you're telling is the truth.
If you believe the lie you're telling is the truth, could he pass the lie detector test?
Probably.
That's scary.
Of course, lie detectors are not really lie detectors.
Right.
They're simply detectors of how much sweat is on your skin,
and
little
heartbeat
things like that.
pattern and skin movement and stuff like that. Sure, of course.
But yes, if a lie detector really worked, he could pass the test because he believes everything that he's saying.
But when he sees contradictory reports, he can't believe all. I don't know.
He says things the opposite of what he said the previous week, the previous month, or the previous year. But he doesn't remember it that way.
Yeah, boy, we have a dangerous president.
We certainly do.
So what can we do? What can you and I do while these politicians, who one of them's a liar and one of them's a crackpot, and I'll let you decide which is which. Yeah, because I can't. What do you and I do in this? Do we just let these two idiots destroy the world?
We're stuck. There is
that's not saving the universe, Howard.
No, I know, because the only lever that we've got is the 2018 elections.
Right.
And you don't win an election because you volunteer at the last second. You win an election if you work for 2 years, or even more like 12 years, to win it. And those of us who have the time need to be a part of the Democratic Party's process. And the Democratic Party needs to find a charismatic leader.
Which there are some people out there, but nobody's jumping up to the forefront. And I think nobody's jumping up to the forefront because nobody wants to be in Trump's crosshairs. I really do get the feeling that politicians are afraid of him, in the sense that, like, nobody wants to go person to person with him.
Donald Trump understands something I didn't believe in. When I was in publicity, I did not believe that any publicity is good publicity. Negative publicity, as far as I was concerned, was negative, and that's it, and was to be avoided at all costs. But Donald Trump has demonstrated that negative publicity can be good publicity. Joshua Green, in his new book about Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, points out that Donald Trump was invited to a gridiron dinner by a friend of mine, Lally Weymouth, an acquaintance of mine, who used to own the Washington Post, and that when Barack Obama took to the stage, he spent his entire time on stage. The whole point of these dinners is to roast somebody, to ridicule somebody. Obama spent his entire time ridiculing Donald Trump. Donald Trump left early, and it was a huge humiliation. But it started Donald Trump's serious political career, partly because he wanted to get revenge, but also negative publicity was publicity that kept repeating the Trump name and helped to further put him on the map, because one person's negative is another person's positive. If those folks, those liberals who are destroying American civilization, that's you and me.
Yes.
If those terrible liberals are supporting, let's say, Elizabeth Warren, then to the right, that means Elizabeth Warren is evil.
It's just that simple.
Right.
But it is that simple because anyone on there wasn't actually. I did like Kasich of Ohio, but even him I had problems with. So yeah, because he's evil. He's on the right.
Right.
So I guess I'm as not closed-minded, but
as tribal-minded as
tribal-minded.
The right,
yes, that's
because
exactly
it's one
right.
tribe up against another. It's us versus them, and to see how us versus them works and how it's used by politicians. Look at my first book, The Lucifer Principle, A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History, because it's laid out very clearly in that book. So the us versus them primal instincts are, in fact, the instincts that Steve Bannon saw at work when he was working with video gamers. They are, in fact, what every demagogue uses. They are, in fact, what we regard as enlightened politicians use. Where does Elizabeth Warren get most of her publicity? On the right, you'll get emails from the DCC,
yes.
the Democratic whatever it is committee. You'll get emails saying Elizabeth Warren rips Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren skewers
Yes.
Donald Trump. Now, is that rational, compassionate, cooperative language?
No, it's divisive.
Yeah, it's divisive, and we love it. We eat it up. We fortunately, in the Western world, we have something called popular culture. And in popular culture, we have things like sports. And in sports, we have two cities going up against each other.
My team versus your team.
Yeah. And if your team wins, you get a testosterone boost,
Yes.
along with 10 million or a million other people who are fans of your team.
And ultimately, the players on my team I'm actually rooting, and it's a Jerry Seinfeld joke. I'm not rooting for the people. I'm rooting for the laundry. I'm rooting for the shirt
Right.
they wear because that's the shirt of my
It's
team.
the symbol of your tribe.
Yes.
It's the symbol of your team.
So when the Yankees, I'm a big baseball fan, brought in Roger Clemens. Now, Roger Clemens was for the Red Sox many years, an amazing pitcher. I'm not talking about the allegations of steroid use. That's not about this conversation. But as a New York Yankee fan, I despised Roger Clemens. Roger Clemens becomes a New York Yankee, and I'm one of his biggest fans. Why? Because he's now part of my tribe.
You got it.
And what you're saying earlier is that if we were to go to a war, there's a chance I might be supporting Donald Trump's actions because he's part of my American tribe?
Absolutely. Absolutely, in ways that you never imagined.
So
think of something
Yeah.
about that sports going to the baseball
Yeah.
game. Now, I've only done it twice in my
Oh,
life.
we'll go
or
to a
something
game.
like that.
Let's go.
Well, but so you go to a baseball game, you get thoroughly absorbed. You get absorbed on the level of passions that you, if
Yeah.
you've never been to one before, don't even know you've got. You, even if you don't like sports, you find yourself rising out of your seat at certain points, screaming at certain points, because there's something deep and visceral in you that overrides the rational you of everyday life. And it happens when two big social groups participate in an intergroup tournament, go up against each other. It draws on emotions you wouldn't have otherwise known that you had. Well, in the old days, the tribal days, those emotions were used to make war.
Correct.
Now, in popular culture, they are used in a way that doesn't lead to violence at all. So we've found an outlet for the us versus them emotions in our society that doesn't require killing anybody, which is terrific. But that still means that we have periods of peace, and every great once in a while, once in a generation, once every 2 generations, this oddity erupts of war. And that oddity of war exists in every 2 generations or so, even of chimpanzees. So it goes back to common ancestors 6 million years ago. In fact, it goes back to common ancestors at the very beginning of life, 4 billion years ago. Bacteria, who are organized in huge groups, just like Cleveland is organized
Yes, and
against New York,
Yes.
and who go to war with each other. And what kind of war do? They use weapons of mass destruction. They use what we've stolen from them, and we call antibiotics. Why are antibiotics useful to us? Because they kill entire tribes of bacteria. Where do we get it? From bacteria, who use it to kill rival tribes.
of bacteria.
So you can find the equivalent of the Yankees versus the Cleveland, whatever they are.
The Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, the Cleveland Indians, 4 billion years ago, among bacteria. So if bacteria, our oldest ancestors did it, that it's made war, and if chimpanzees make war, when we tell ourselves we're the only species that makes war, we are as crazy as Donald Trump and as poorly informed.
Okay, but I want to go back to something that really scares the shit out of me. And I do use cursing particular because I'm actually scared about this. If Donald Trump, I was not a George Bush fan. Yeah, I rallied behind him after the events of September 11th. I was a New Yorker, and I was rung up into when he stood on the mounds and of rubble and down in the World Trade Center and said, the men who did this, I hear you, and soon the men who did this will hear you too. And that was just, I think, probably his greatest ever unifying moment as a president. If Donald Trump, and I don't think he is a smart enough man, is aware that a war would unify the country behind him, wouldn't he just go to war?
Not necessarily. If he understands that New York could be destroyed, well, there's Trump Tower.
Right.
There's his hometown. There's Queens.
Do you think that means anything to him?
Yes. He's human. In
yeah.
fact, because he basically is lobotomized,
Yes.
doesn't have a prefrontal cortex, and operates entirely on the limbic system, the primitive emotional level of the brain, he probably has more strong ties to New York City than even you and I.
Right, and he knows literally where the bodies in the city are buried.
Yes.
He knows how to get stuff done in the city and has more connections to the city than you and I ever would.
Yeah.
Every mayor is on the speed dial, if you will.
Right. There goes the Trump empire. There goes his way to make a living. There go all of our ways of making a living if there's a nuclear war.
So for him,
But the question is,
Yeah.
does he understand
that's right.
that?
That's
And there's, and in all probability, because he, on the conscious level, on the unconscious level, the level of the primitive emotional brain, he gets things that Hillary Clinton and you and I didn't get.
Right.
But on that conscious level of the symbolic self, he's so poorly equipped with historical examples and he has such a primitive cartoon version of what reality is that he may not understand that this will not just be restricted to North Korea, this war, that it could go out of control and lead to the destruction of New York.
That's some scary shit.
Yeah. And it's better to be scared now and to ponder solutions, even though I've come up with no solutions other than working very hard for 2018.
Would a preemptive strike just do? I mean, again, we got to sign off and get the sign off from our allies.
Yeah, exactly. And so the real work comes in the diplomacy, and in the very same kind of diplomacy that was used to line up 15 countries in the Security Council for increased sanctions against North Korea. Another thing that's happened is that China and I believe Russia have both come out with statements that nuclear-armed North Korea is unacceptable. That's a huge step toward getting these people on our side. Now, I don't know who's been doing this. Rex Tillerson, Nikki Haley, those are and career diplomats probably have been very involved in this. The very people that Donald Trump calls the swamp have probably been involved. But I haven't seen who's doing it. I'd be very curious to know.
I like to play poker sometimes. And in poker, you call bluffs, you distract, you play down one hand to play up another hand. You kind of say, hey, look over here, but in reality, the action's over there. Is North Korea a distraction from a larger issue that the Trump administration is facing? Now, we know Paul Manafort, we found out a couple weeks ago, his house was raided, papers taken, raided, I should say, court subpoenaed, legally raided by the FBI, not raided in a bad way, and that the FBI did leave with some material. What that material is, we'll find out down the road. We know the heat is definitely being turned up on the whole administration in the White House. It seems at the same exact time, while that heat in D.C. is getting turned up from whatever shady or suspect activities that the Trumps took, at that same exact time that heat's getting turned up, we are hearing more and more about North Korea. And there's a lot of people out there who think this is just all one big distraction play to get us away from talking about the Russia thing.
We have to understand something in America. We become very narcissistic here, and we believe that only we are able to accomplish anything. So if Kim Jong-un, the head of North Korea, makes a statement, hey, he's just acting as a puppet of us because he couldn't possibly have any efficacy in his own world.
My point is, though, but he's been making statements all along that now the White House is returning these statements with this fire and fury type comment. Is the White House actually responding more now than maybe under an Obama administration because it wants to look like, first of all, it wants to look, potent, and it wants to distract from Russia? Well,
the fact is that North Korea has launched two ICBM-like missiles. The fact is that they have continued to work on their nuclear devices. The fact is that those rockets can do something that no North Korean rockets were capable of until a few weeks ago, and that is reaching the major cities of the United States. And none of that was choreographed by Donald Trump. He lucked into it. But the people who are using this as a distraction are the Chinese, who use North Korea like a magician waving a handkerchief while he does a trick in his back pocket. The Chinese are using this to get concessions on the South China Sea. After all, if they're the only people who can control North Korea, and if we are begging them to control North Korea, then surely we owe them something in exchange for our requests, right? And that means turning a blind eye to what's happening in the South China Sea, or turning a blind eye to what's happening in the showdown between India and China. I mean, how many headlines have you seen about that confrontation between
Zero.
India and China? Right, exactly. So is the fact that North Korea is eating up all the headlines helping keep this conflict with India and China invisible?
Yeah, it's keeping it off the map.
So who's really waving the handkerchief? Who's really pulling off the trick here? Who's really
China's controlling all the cards right now.
Yeah, and China. So China, this is China's distraction.
Right.
It just happens to be to the advantage of Donald Trump as well. But it's not his fault. He didn't create it. Kim Jong-un is not his puppet.
Well, we're at an hour now. I want to go like another 5 minutes here. So thank you for listening through the show this far. What if a general says no?
The fact is that generals are sworn to follow their commander-in-chief, but there has been an awful lot about their ethical commitments.
Because killing, 40,000 people in Pyongyang, I can't say it. Is it Pyongyang? No, that's
Pyongyang.
That's South Korea.
No, that's North Korea.
North Korea, and Seoul is South Korea.
Yeah.
So killing, 500,000 people in Pyongyang seems unethical.
Yes, and the fact is that the people I know in the military are at the lieutenant colonel grade. And they're on their way to general, some of those who are playing their cards right. They have been given more education in the civic virtues that make America America than any other people I have ever met in my life. They are proponents of peace. They know that war is horrible and totally out of control. They know that the people they care about and are sworn to care about, the troops under them, will die in a war, and that their only way to protect those troops is to maintain peace. So they know that there are certain ethical standards that are part of the American civic character. And yes, it is possible that generals would say no. It is possible that generals could get together and override the commander-in-chief. It's not likely. I've never heard of it happening in the United States, but it is theoretically possible.
To give you some context, by the way, the population of Pyongyang in 2017 is listed at 3.2 million. So there's a lot of people there that could die, and we are talking extremely innocent people.
Right. And then what would Pyongyang do? I mean, they know that their city could be wiped out. They've planned all these contingencies. Would they take out Washington? Would they take out New York?
Right.
We don't know. But they would be as committed to a retaliatory strike as we're committed to a retaliatory strike.
So then where is, I close my eyes and I see a pressure cooker, right? And before you open up a pressure cooker, you have to let out a little steam at a time. And a little steam and a little time. So you can get the pressure between the outside and the inside on par.
Right.
So you can open up the lid.
Right.
Where might we be looking for a little steam release on this pressure cooker that's building?
It's China and Russia. It's the process that we began last weekend.
And with we got and in that we have a Russian government who we're either working with or not working with, and we're either sanctioning or being sanctioned by or evicting its people, and they're evicting us. So that's kind of a weird ally right now in bedfellow.
These are weird allies, but we have to work with them because they're the ones who would be caught up in a war on North Korea's side.
But how can I work with you, Howard, if me and your assistant are having a really bad time and I accuse your system? Howard has an assistant because Howard has a very difficult and regimented life and he needs help. Like managing Howard is a business in and of himself. So, and you can look up Howard Bloom and find out more about that, and you should. So say Howard, and I have my own company, Hanger Studios. Howard's assistant, what's your latest assistant's name?
This is Caitlin.
Caitlin, brand new assistant brought on board. Say if Caitlin is going out of her way to bring down my company, the Hanger Studios, right? And that's kind of a bad thing, and not that she would, but let's just envision she's going out of her way to bring down my company. At the same time, me and Howard have to work together on this podcast. Now, of course, we love doing this, but in this scenario, I mean, isn't it awfully weird that here we are blaming Russia for completely ruining the concept of American democracy, and yet we are dealing with Russia, or at least hoping to deal with Russia, as a steam vent.
There's an old Arab expression. You've probably heard it. My brother against me and my brother against my cousins, my cousins, my brother and I against the people from another town, and my entire town against the world. I've
Yes, but I understand what you're
characterized
saying.
it poorly.
Yes.
So the people you're normally squabbling with, you come together with when you're up against the threat of the annihilation of your people, or even the humiliation of your people.
But what I hear you saying, then let's take that to the next. So either we are at war with North Korea and the Russia thing gets forgotten, because I mean, any war with North Korea, we're going to stop talking about any Russian involvement in our elections, or we unite with Russia, and again, back to that steam pressure cooker, let some of the steam out, but then now we're dealing with Russia, and now it looks even more suspect. I mean, all of it is dirty.
It's dirty, but it's human nature. I mean, think of it. I'm going to say something totally off the wall.
Yeah.
Every day you walk around with something like 30 feet of gut that contains shit.
Yes.
And you don't ponder, you don't obsess on the shit all the time. You obsess on the things that you can accomplish in your life. And the time to overlook the shit comes when we, Russia and China, are up against an existential dilemma. At the moment, North Korea is not going to aim its missiles at Russia, but it could choose to.
And should they aim their missiles at Guam and fire at Guam?
It looks to me like what they're going to do is another test of their rockets, this time aiming at Guam, and they're testing to see at what point we'll snap.
Well, I mean,
Because he who postures the most aggressively and demonstrates the greatest sense of confidence and control wins.
You tell a story on this show a lot, and I'm going to try to paraphrase it and fill me in where I might be wrong. But you talk about how two large primates can be very, very proud in a fight, and then afterwards, even the winner might go into the corner and have a breakdown.
Right.
Have like a mental breakdown after the fight of do you see
And
that?
Hitler used to do that.
Right. Can you see our president, that guy? I just had an aversion to saying his name. But could you see President Trump doing that after a fight? Do you think he could be that human, or not even that human, that much of a being, that after all this posturing, after this chest-to-chest thumping, that he might then have those moments of horror and
Well,
self-doubt?
remember, when the two chimpanzees go up against each other, and each one tries his best to look utterly regal, utterly magnificent, overpoweringly alpha male, and then goes behind a rock and hides while his lips fly up in this expression of excruciating nervousness. Remember how hard that chimpanzee works to make sure that nobody ever sees that moment. Look how hard Hitler worked. You don't know about Hitler's the rug shredding,
Sure.
rolling around on the floor screaming in a room upstairs. He kept that hidden. Nobody was up there. He locked the door. We don't know about Donald Trump because he's flashing alpha signals, and he's not going to show us these symbols of weakness, and that's what alpha males do, whether they're chimpanzees or human beings. They try to look like something other than they really are. They keep their shit to themselves.
These two men, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, are very similar in that they've had a lot of people around them their whole life telling them how great they are. And they were both born into money and never had to work with money and allowed their money to get further and further
These
on.
are very good points.
These two men are very, very connected. So it is interesting that we really do have here, from not putting a politics into it, but we do have two spoiled brats going at it with one another. Two spoiled brats who got whatever they wanted. And if they couldn't get it, they bought it. And they bought favor and made people not disappear. Well, Kim Jong-un
In
definitely.
the case of Kim Jong-un.
Absolutely. And we don't, I'm not going to say he's a murderer in that regards for Donald Trump. But we have two spoiled brats and two bullies going head to head right now. Like, we really lose. that these are the two people that are kind of deciding a lot of the free world. Now, you look at Europe. Is Europe involved in this? No, not necessarily, but our free world is definitely at stake.
Well, Kim Jong-un made a brilliant move when he said, we're going to work out a plan to attack Guam, and announced when the plan will be ready, and then said that the plan was to take 2 rockets and send them to within 30 miles of Guam and down them in the sea. He had a move in mind beyond the posturing. Donald Trump does not have a move in mind, and it has been said that his military options are extremely limited, and that's being said by generals. So he may posture and thump his chest about having all kinds of options, but apparently, I mean, it takes years to work out options.
Yes.
And apparently the military doesn't have a lot of options for him. So here is Kim Jong-un backing up his rhetoric with a gesture. And a gesture that, because it's only a test, is not something that we can use as justification for wiping out Pyongyang and his weapons facilities in a mountain.
No, those missiles do have to land in the ocean. That's killing a lot of wildlife.
A lot of fish, right.
A lot of fish.
So at any rate, so he has a tactical move in mind. And what has Donald Trump's tactical move been? It's been to say, well, the things I said about turning North Korea into fire and flame a few days ago, I didn't even express that strongly enough. I should have said something much stronger.
Do you think he was kind of shocked?
I don't know what his emotions are when he runs
either.
into these totally unexpected moves, because this is like playing a game.
Yeah.
And a game is an us versus them thing.
You know, you mentioned game. I'm immediately brought to Game of Thrones right now, currently on HBO in its 7th season, and amazing. And we are seeing the sum of those past 6.5 seasons of everyone. It's a Game of Thrones moving around trying to secure the throne, the kingdom. And what you were describing right now is very akin to what's happening there, where weird armies have to unite and weird forces have to work together that might not work together to kind of prevent somebody from taking the throne that they don't feel necessarily belongs
Right.
there.
And fiction appeals to that part of the gut, to those gut emotions that Donald Trump is very good at tapping.
Well, you say fiction, I think mythology. I think we've been through this before. I think as society, and going back to, as you said, 4 million years ago or 40 million years ago with bacteria, that mythology...
4 billion.
See, you're such a... But you're right, 4 billion years ago. So that's, I mean, it might as well be 40 million. It doesn't matter. I mean, we can't even fathom what that is. That mythology, though, is in there. That's in our DNA, right? That mythology of... we have to reunite. That mythology of, yeah, me and my brother can fight, but you come after my brother, then you're going to be fighting the both of us. That is like a mythology, part of our DNA as human beings, as not human beings, as beings, as multi-celled animals.
Well, humans do something that animals don't. They build alliances. And humans do it in the most primitive form by marrying across tribes. In other words, a man will take a wife from another tribe, and that represents an alliance. And it means that if one of them is attacked,
a couple years ago,
so if one of them is attacked, the two of them both pile on to the other. And the family that's the most effective in building up alliances has the biggest alliance when the time comes for confrontation, is most likely to survive and take over. So this is very basic in human nature, that along with us and them. And you're right, it rears its head in mythology. And it rears its head in fiction. It rears its head in story and narrative over and over again. What is the Iliad all about? It's about a battle between two related cultures, two cultures that are trade partners. So in modern theory, they should never make war, because they're trade partners.
They're profiting off one another.
Yeah, but despite the fact that they're trade partners, they do go to war. And what are the Mycenaeans, the Greeks?
Yes,
the Greeks is a bunch of alliances of warlords, but Troy is a city all on its own. And so far as I know, they don't have big alliances in their battle.
Right.
And ultimately, one wipes out the other. The Greeks wipe out the Trojans. Andromache, one of the female characters, she's the wife of one of the great heroes of Troy who dies on the battlefield, killed by Achilles. Andromeda, or whatever her name is, when the moment comes where the Greeks are about to enter the Trojan city, she looks at her baby and makes a speech. and says, when they come, they're going to bash your head up against the wall. And what she doesn't know is the evolutionary psychology and biology behind that. If a woman is lactating, she's not fertile.
Right.
If you bash her baby's head up against the wall, which was a traditional thing to do in war, it shows up in the Bible too, back in those times, you bring her back into sexual flowering.
Yeah, bring back fertility.
Right, and you use her as, of course, rape is a part of war. Taking her as a prisoner and turning into a sex slave, that's a part of war. So one group destroys the other and its culture, but takes its women and uses its women to make more Greeks.
Right.
And that's the basic pattern of human war. And he who can get the biggest alliance gets the biggest prizes. And what do we need to do practically? Get Russia and China on our side. Build alliances. We cannot do this alone.
And last thing, why are we so beholden to South Korea?
Because we came to their defense in 1951. We helped them rebuild. The chaebols, the giant companies like Samsung, those started out as contractors to the American military who built roads for them and, simple building for them. And then they were chosen by Park Chung-hee, I think his name was, this incredible entrepreneurial dictator, as people who had a nonstop work ethic and were creative. And he gave them massive government support.
Because I do feel as though, we as a country are very pro-Israel, pro-South Korea. I just feel, which I'm obviously have no problem with either of those. It's interesting as a country that we kind of do seem to be that, again, going back to me and my brother can fight, but the second you fight me and my brother, you're going to fight me and my brother. We do have that with some of these little countries that really do rely on us for a lot of military might.
And look what South Korea has accomplished. In 1951, the average South Korean had the same wage as the average Egyptian. Today, the average South Korean has an income that's roughly 20 times that of 1951. 20 times. They have faster internet connections than we do. Samsung products are competing with Apple products to dominate the entire cell phone market. This is a good choice on our part, supporting South Korea. The Koreans have a culture that values learning.
Yes.
And it values self-reinvention. It's done that for a long time, probably 2,000 years or so. So they keep making progress. They're a wonderful choice of an ally. But remember, that very same Korean people is north of the 38th parallel.
Well, they speak the same language.
They speak the same language. They value this, or they did value initially the same things.
Yes.
In 1951 when they were separated. And yet one is sunk in dire poverty, and the only thing that works is making new military hardware, which they're doing a brilliant job of. And it just shows that different cultures, when you impose a different culture, when a founder establishes a new culture, that culture can lead the very same people in totally opposite directions.
If you want to see a difference between South Korea and North Korea, I was turned on to this about a year ago. I saw this picture for the very first time, and I highly recommend it. Just do a Google search for North Korea at night.
Yes.
And you can actually see a huge dark void on the Korean peninsula. South Korea is completely dependent to be connected to Asia through North Korea. So it really, truly is the peninsula. And you can really see South Korea, especially Seoul, South Korea, which is only 30 miles from the border. 30 miles from me and you right now is like Long Island, middle of Long Island. Really super close. So Seoul is only 30 miles from the border with North Korea. And if you take a look at these pictures, you just see a literal black mass in the middle of the world out there. To the south of it, you see Seoul, and you see the big cities of South Korea lit up. And to the north, obviously, you see China. And it really goes to what you were saying, where 50 years ago, well, now 60 years, we're getting old there. But, back in 1949, before the split and everything, you see how one country went one way and another country decided to go another way.
Even though they're the same people, even though it's the same raw material, and even though the part of Korea that was industrialized and developed the most was the North. The part that was the most backward and the most agricultural was the South. And there is something in the Muhammad Code, How a Desert Prophet Brought You ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram, that book, called The Founder Effect. And it shows that a charismatic founder can lay a pattern on a culture, can brainwash a culture in a way that turns it, no matter what the raw material is, in a direction that lasts a long, long time. Look at Muhammad's influence 1,400 years
Unbelievable.
later. That's the founder effect. That is the effect with the Kim family. The original Kim was a part of the Comintern, this little graduate school for Soviet-style dictators that the Russians ran in Moscow. And he's taken that pattern, Stalin's pattern, and he's imposed it on North Korea. And what has it accomplished? The darkness that you just spoke about.
Yeah, it's a striking. I recommend everyone look it up. And not for nothing, but you should also look where North Korea is on the map. I think it's kind of important right now. I saw a recent video where they went out and asked people of New York, where is North Korea? And a lot of people could not find it.
Right.
Which is very alarming in that I guarantee in 1940, when was D-Day? 1941.
No, D-Day was probably 1944 or 1945.
Yes, yeah, that's right. But when that happened, I guarantee most Americans knew where Germany was back then.
Yes. They had a good idea.
And-
Plus, we were learning German in American schools if we were on our way to college.
Yeah. So it's all very alarming. Howard, we got to stop, man.
I hate stopping.
I know. But we were 80 minutes in.
Oh, God.
So I'm good with 80. You're good with 80?
Right, yeah. 81 sounds good.
So let's wrap it up. Tell us where we can find out more about you.
HowardBloom.net.
And if you're up late at night or if you have access to the computer, which clearly you do because you are listening to this podcast, Howard is a frequent contributor to Coast AM, which is the #1 overnight talk radio show in the nation.
Right. I'm doing my 210th appearance, I think it is, tonight.
Yeah, who's counting? And you don't know if you're doing 4 minutes or 40.
No, it's going to be 4 minutes on North Korea.
So listen. Well, you're going to miss this because this is not going to be up in time, but we're going to do a little weird time traveling. But check out Howard frequently on Coast to Coast. His books are all out. The Muhammad Code came out this year.
And in approximately a month, How I Accidentally Started the 60s will come out. The
Which
book
is-
that Timothy Leary says is a monumental masterpiece of American literature, filled with nonstop scientific comedy routines, waves of hilarity, wah, woo, aha, and he compares it to the work of James Joyce.
It's my favorite book of yours because
terrific.
it's the most you.
Yeah.
Whereas your other books are very, very fact-based and intellectual and with humor and like insight. The How I Started the 60s is you.
It's just a story.
Yeah,
right?
and I like that, obviously.
But it's not just a story. It's a
not.
story of how I got where I am, and it's very important for me to get that across to you as a reader.
Yeah.
You haven't. I don't think you've read the current version.
I have not.
No, and the upgraded version, but it tells you how you get to be a person who wants to understand everything and use every specialization as just a pixel and put those pixels together into a big picture. And it's the most exhilarating thing you can possibly do with your life. And I've been doing it now since I was something like 13 or 14, maybe 12 years old. And it's wonderful. And there's no word for it. I've created a wordomnology.
Yes.
But it tells you how at least one person got to be this way and encourages you to be this way too.
Live your true, authentic self, I always say. Howard, always a pleasure. My name is Chad Dugatz. You can find out.
And he's wonderful. Chad Dugatz is wonderful.
Thank you, Howard. You can find out more about me and my podcast production company called The Hangar Studios at thehangarstudios.com. I'm not online on Twitter as much as I should be. It's just once I'm on, I waste too much time, so I can't be productive. But Howard, you tweet often.
I tweet often.
And it's Howard X Bloom, at Howard X Bloom.
Right.
So check him out there. We're not in on Monday. You don't know this, but I'm on vacation next week.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I know I'm taking a summer vacation.
Oh,
Don't tell
God.
anyone. It ruins the mystique that I work all the time.
Right.
But I'm taking a summer vacation. So we're back in 2 weeks' time. So tune in for that show. And until then, Howard, let us pray that the powers that be,
The dummy in the White House.
and the spoiled brat in North Korea, both spoiled brats, find their own little steam valve, their little spigot, and let's alleviate some of this pressure, because right now it is loud, it is pompous, it is chest thumping, and I know, while I don't feel it much, I know a lot of people who are living in blankets right now and don't want to face the world, and it's a scary thing. So let's. Do you think we're gonna get some relief in the next 2 weeks?
It would be nice, and there's no way to tell because these two guys are relatively unpredictable. They're very unpredictable.
Right. So there we're at. Howard, thank you for today's show.
Chad, thank you.
You've been listening to Howard Bloom Saves the Universe with Howard Bloom and Chad Dugatz. To learn more about Howard, visit howardbloom.net. Howard Bloom Saves the Universe is a production of Pro Media and Howard Bloom. Copyright 2015 by Howard Bloom. I'm Matt Tombs.